I didn't move for a long time. The phone sat there on the table, its screen dark now, but the light of what I'd seen still burned behind my eyes. It's strange how silence can scream so loudly. Every sound in the apartment felt exaggerated. The ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, even my own breathing. I could feel my pulse in my throat, heavy, uneven, like my body couldn't decide whether to fight or collapse. I wanted to pretend it wasn't real. I wanted to rewind the night, to be the person I was just 10 minutes earlier. The man who thought he was loved, who thought his best friend would never betray him. But there was no going back. Once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. I walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. The street outside was empty, wet from a recent rain. The reflection of streetlights shimmered across puddles like broken glass. I thought about her laugh echoing through this apartment just hours ago. About the way she kissed me goodnight before going to bed. Now I knew that kiss was borrowed, maybe even stolen. My chest tightened, and I pressed my forehead against the cold glass, trying to breathe through it. Every inhale felt heavier than the last. I sat back down, opened the phone again, and forced myself to keep reading. Every line was a knife. I miss you. Can't wait to see you again. He has no idea. The words blurred, but I kept scrolling because part of me needed to understand the full depth of their deceit. I wasn't looking for closure. I was measuring the damage. I wanted to know how long I'd been living a lie. The timestamps told me everything. Months. It had been going on for months. Through anniversaries, dinners, small celebrations, nights she'd fallen asleep in my arms after saying, "I love you." My hands shook. I wanted to throw the phone, to break something, to release the pressure that was building inside, but I couldn't move. I just sat there, feeling the weight of every word, every lie, pressing down on me. When I finally looked up, I realized how dark the room had become. The shadows stretched long across the floor, the outlines of our shared life mocking me. The photo frames on the shelf, the vacation picture, the one of her and my best friend laughing at a barbecue, me standing between them, suddenly looked staged, like props from a cruel play I hadn't known I was performing in. I walked over, picked up that picture, and stared at it. Her hand was resting on my friend's shoulder. I thought it was a casual gesture once. Now it looked like a secret they were sharing in plain sight. I placed the photo face down. Something inside me went cold, calm, almost methodical. This was no longer about emotion. It was about truth. I realized then that I wasn't going to confront them in anger or tears. That would give them control, give them a story where I was the broken one. No, I would take that from them. I would take everything they'd built in the dark and drag it into the light, piece by piece. I'd make the truth louder than their lies. But to do that, I needed evidence. I needed to be patient. I made coffee, not because I wanted it, but because I needed something to do with my hands. The smell filled the room, familiar and grounding, and for a moment I almost felt normal. Then the cup trembled slightly as I lifted it, and I remembered why. I wasn't the same person anymore. Trust once broken doesn't rebuild, it transforms. I was transforming right then, quietly, beneath the surface. I walked into the bedroom. She was asleep, turned away from me, her breathing steady and soft. The sight of her used to bring peace. Now it felt foreign. I studied her face for a long time, wondering how many lies could hide behind that kind of calm. I thought about waking her up, demanding an explanation, but what good would that do? Lies come easy to liars. She'd deny, deflect, cry, maybe even try to twist it back on me. I wasn't ready for her words. I needed her silence. I went back to the living room and opened my laptop. The screen glowed faintly as I created a new folder. I named it simply Truth. One by one, I began saving screenshots, messages, pictures, timestamps. Every piece of evidence went in there like a puzzle piece, building towards something I couldn't yet define. My hands were steady now, focused. Revenge wasn't an explosion for me. It was construction. Careful, deliberate, patient. I wasn't acting out of rage. I was preparing justice. Hours passed, and the world outside shifted from night to morning. I watched the first light of dawn creep through the blinds and settle across the floor. Everything looked the same, but nothing was. I realized that betrayal doesn't announce itself. It creeps in quietly, like a draft under a locked door, until one night you finally feel the cold. And once you feel it, you can't unfeel it. I sat there until the coffee went cold, thinking about the irony of it all. She and my best friend. Two people I would have defended blindly. Two people I would have trusted with my life. They had built their comfort on my faith in them, and now that faith would be the very thing that exposed them. As the sun rose higher, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't let this turn me into someone bitter or small. My revenge would be clean, calm, and undeniable. No shouting, no chaos, just truth. Because truth, when delivered at the right time, can destroy louder than any scream. I closed my eyes for a moment, listening to the city waking up beyond the window. A car door slammed. Someone called out to a friend. A dog barked in the distance. Ordinary sounds of ordinary life. Yet everything felt different. The man sitting in that room was not the same one who had gone to bed hours ago. That man believed in love. This one believed in evidence. When I finally stood up, the first words that came to me were quiet, but certain. It starts now. And I knew they weren't just words. They were a declaration, a vow. The night everything broke had ended, and in its ashes, something new had begun. A cold, patient fire burning behind calm eyes, waiting for the perfect moment to expose the truth. I used to think I had everything figured out. 3 years with her felt like building a life one quiet moment at a time. Our days were stitched together by routines so ordinary they felt sacred. Saturday mornings meant grocery runs where she'd argue over which brand of cereal to buy, pretending to care while secretly wanting the same one every time. Sunday nights, she'd light that little orange lamp by the couch, the one that made our apartment glow like a photograph. I'd play her favorite playlist, soft, melancholic songs that always made her hum under her breath. She'd tease me for being too serious, and I'd pretend to be annoyed just to see her laugh. It wasn't the big things that made us feel real. It was the quiet ones, the invisible threads that tied two people together. I thought those things meant something permanent, but I was wrong. And then there was Mark, my best friend, my brother in everything but blood. We met in college, shared dorm rooms, shared secrets, and even shared debts when life got rough. He was there at my lowest, when my father died, when I lost my job, when I thought I couldn't crawl out of another failure. Mark was the guy who'd hand you the last beer without you having to ask. The kind of friend you'd trust with your house, your keys, your family. I never imagined he'd need to be trusted with my heart, and that he'd be the one to break it. When I first saw those messages, I didn't want to believe it. My brain refused to connect the two names on that screen, hers and his, in the way they appeared. But denial doesn't erase truth. It only delays the crash. And when it hit hard. Betrayal doesn't just burn. It disorients. You start doubting everything. Every laugh, every word, every moment that once felt safe now feels rehearsed. I looked at photos of the three of us together. Birthdays, barbecues, beach trips. And suddenly every smile looked forced. Every memory looked infected. The pain came in waves, sharp and endless. But underneath it all was a quiet determination. The kind that builds when you know you've been played, but refuse to stay the fool. I didn't want to explode. I wanted to understand. I wanted to know how deep it went, how long they had been lying, and how far I'd have to go to make the truth undeniable. So I did what I always do when I'm cornered. I made a plan. I started small. A notebook, a list. Names, dates, excuses, anything that didn't fit. It felt cold and mechanical at first, but I needed that distance. Emotion clouds judgment. Facts don't. She said she was working late on the 12th. I remembered Mark posting about being out of town that same night. She said her phone had died when I called. His last message online was at the exact time mine went unanswered. Coincidence? Maybe once. But patterns don't lie. I started collecting data like a detective, not a lover. Every screenshot, every message, every timestamp. But screenshots can be faked, and I wasn't going to give them that defense. I exported the raw files, the full message histories with metadata, the kind of proof that can't be argued away. I saved it all on a hidden drive, encrypted and secure. I wasn't preparing for a confrontation. I was preparing for exposure. Once I had that, I turned to social media. I didn't post. I watched. People tell on themselves without realizing it. A comment here, a shared joke there. The small overlaps between their lives were impossible to ignore once I started looking. Photos that once felt innocent now felt like confessions. A shot of her at work, with a reflection in the window that matched his office. A trip she said was with her friends, but he happened to upload a throwback from the same city that same weekend. It wasn't proof by itself, but stacked together, it became a map of deceit. What stung the most were the details that used to make me smile. Her choice of words, the way she signed her messages with a heart, the stupid inside jokes that I thought were ours. They weren't. She reused them, recycled them. What I thought was special was just practiced. That realization hurt more than any single message ever could. It meant I was never unique, just next in line. But I couldn't let the pain drive me. Pain makes people sloppy. Anger makes people reckless. I needed control. I told myself that every move I made had to be deliberate. If I confronted them too early, they'd deny everything, twist the story, turn it into my fault. I'd seen people do it before, play the victim when caught. Not this time. This time, the evidence would speak louder than my words. I knew people would talk when it all came out. They'd gossip, speculate, take sides. Some would pity me. Others would laugh behind my back. That's the price of exposure. But the truth doesn't care about comfort. The truth just is. I had to accept that some people would get hurt, maybe even people who didn't deserve it. But if I let fear silence me, then their lies would win. So I built a timeline, my own map of their deceit. Every date, every excuse, every gap that didn't fit. I cross-checked her work trips with his client meetings. Matched time zones, call logs, messages, even Uber receipts I found on her email. Lies crumble when you align them with time. Once I laid it all out, the pattern became undeniable. 2 lines that kept crossing where they shouldn't. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than pain. I felt clarity, cold, steady clarity, the kind that makes you breathe slower, think sharper. I realized I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to fight. All I needed was the truth, assembled carefully, piece by piece, until it was impossible to ignore. I sat there one night, staring at the timeline on my screen, every line a piece of betrayal, and I felt strangely calm. The chaos inside me had quieted. The fear, the heartbreak, they were still there, but beneath them was a growing sense of control. They had built their relationship on lies. I was going to tear it down with facts, not out of spite, but out of justice. Because sometimes the only way to heal from betrayal is to make sure the world sees the truth exactly as it happened. Raw, undeniable, and inescapable. When I left the cafe after confronting Mark, I thought the hardest part was over. I was wrong. Doubt isn't something you destroy with evidence. It lingers, reshapes itself, and tries to convince you that maybe you misread everything. I kept replaying his face when he saw the messages on my phone. That sudden drain of color, the stiffness in his jaw. You can't fake that kind of fear. It wasn't guilt for being caught. It was the terror of losing control of a lie. I walked home with that image burned into my mind, and the streetlights seemed harsher than usual, like they were exposing everything I had refused to see for months. When I got home, she was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, pretending everything was normal. That word, normal, suddenly felt like a curse. The chipped coffee mug on the table, the smell of her shampoo in the air, the faint hum of the heater, all of it felt staged. She looked up and smiled like nothing was wrong, and that smile broke something in me more than any confession could. I wanted to speak, to throw the truth on the floor between us and watch it explode. But part of me hesitated, not because I doubted her guilt anymore, but because I wanted her to reveal herself, not just react to my accusation. So I played along for a few days. I let her think the routine was intact. I woke up beside her, made breakfast, sent her off to work, and watched her text on the way out the door. Each act of normalcy was like watching a magician repeat a trick you already know the secret to. The suspense wasn't in what she was doing. It was in how long she thought she could keep doing it. I noticed everything now. The subtle way she turned her phone screen away, the sudden need for privacy, the texts that made her lips tighten before she replied. If guilt had a sound, it would be the click of her phone case closing every time I entered the room. By the 3rd day, I couldn't stand the charade. I decided that night would be the moment. No dramatics, no shouting, just truth laid bare. I set my phone to record before she came home, not because I wanted to humiliate her, but because I needed a record, a pure, undeniable version of what happened. When she walked in, I greeted her the same way I always did. She talked about her day, about some imaginary meeting that had run long. I listened, nodding, waiting for the right silence to cut in. When I finally said her name, she looked up, and something in my tone must have given me away. I asked her where she'd really been. Her first instinct was confusion, the same look people use when they're caught off guard in a lie and need a few seconds to build a story. I watched her eyes flicker, calculating. She said she didn't understand what I meant. So I told her, every detail, the messages, the pictures, the timestamps. I said Mark's name, and that was when she stopped breathing for a moment. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then came the excuses, a flood of half-truths and rearranged memories. She said it wasn't serious, that it didn't mean anything. that it was a mistake she wanted to end. She said she'd been lonely, that I'd been distant. The words came like bullets, and for a second, I almost believed them. But then I remembered the files, the matching stories, the overlap in their lies. It wasn't loneliness. It was choice. It wasn't an accident. It was repetition. She reached for my hand and I pulled away. The look on her face was part shock, part shame, and part something I couldn't identify. Maybe regret, maybe fear of losing control of the story. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just told her that I knew everything and that the only thing left was the truth. She tried to cry, but even that felt rehearsed. There's a kind of crying people do when they're sorry, and another kind when they're sorry they got caught. Hers was the second kind, loud, messy, and desperate to rewrite what I already knew. I told her I didn't need her explanation, only her honesty. She said she loved me, and the words sounded empty, like an echo in a burnt-out room. That night, I slept in the spare room. I didn't want to hear her breathing beside me. I could hear her pacing in the living room, whispering on the phone, maybe to Mark, maybe to herself. It didn't matter anymore. Something in me had shifted. The version of myself that trusted her, that trusted both of them, was gone. In its place was something sharper, quieter, and focused. I wasn't going to lash out. I was going to expose them, not through rumor or revenge porn or emotional posts, but through precision. Truth was my weapon and patience was my ally. Over the next few days, I prepared. I gathered the final pieces, arranged them chronologically, and made sure everything was verifiable. The moment of confrontation had stripped away my doubt, but left me with clarity. Brutal, cold clarity. I knew now that they didn't deserve my silence. They had gambled on my restraint, on my tendency to avoid conflict. But restraint is not forgiveness. It's the silence before the impact. When she finally left the apartment for good, she didn't look back. I didn't stop her. She took the lamp that used to glow orange on stormy nights, and I let her have it. That light belonged to the lie now. I sat in the dark, the same dark I'd feared a week ago, and felt strangely calm. Doubt had been replaced with purpose. The confrontation hadn't broken me. It had reshaped me, and as the door clicked shut, I realized something simple and terrifying. The real revenge hadn't even started yet. I spent nights surrounded by the faint blue light of my computer screen, every click sounding louder than it should. It was strange how betrayal could turn you into both the victim and the investigator. Each folder on my desktop carried a quiet ache, proof of what I wished wasn't true. I told myself I wasn't doing this out of obsession. I was doing it for clarity. When trust breaks, you start needing proof of everything, even your own memories. I opened her old messages again, tracing timelines, noticing how their conversations grew bolder over time, how thanks for helping me turned into can't wait to see you again. The words evolved from polite to intimate, from careful to careless. I copied them into a document and labeled each one with time and date. It was mechanical work, but every entry felt like a heartbeat in reverse. Phones remember what people hope to forget. Photos carry geotags, even when you try to erase them. Videos keep timestamps hidden in their data. I extracted everything, checking the metadata like a forensic analyst. One photo she had posted from a work trip had been taken 10 miles from where Mark's car was parked that same night. Another video, shot at dusk, had sound traces of his laugh in the background, faint but unmistakable. The evidence wasn't just building a case, it was rewriting my history. Moments I once thought were sweet memories became markers of deception. The dinner she said was just colleagues, the late-night calls that suddenly disconnected, the long showers followed by a change in mood. Everything began to fit into place like cruel arithmetic. I started to look outward too. People see more than they admit. When betrayal happens in plain sight, it hides in people's politeness. I sent messages to mutual friends, not to accuse, but to listen. Did they ever seem closer than usual? Did you ever notice something odd? I worded them carefully, calm, almost curious. Some replied vaguely, unwilling to get involved, but others cracked. A friend admitted she'd once seen them leaving a restaurant together, though she'd assumed it was a coincidence. Another mentioned how they'd arrived at a party separately, but left within minutes of each other. One person even sent a picture, a casual selfie taken at a beach event, and in the background, there they were, standing closer than friends should. Each message I received was a confirmation of what I already knew, but didn't want to face. The pieces aligned with precision I couldn't ignore. I archived everything, screenshots, photos, chat logs, call histories, and stored them across multiple drives. One copy in the cloud, one on an external hard drive, one printed and sealed in an envelope. Betrayers tend to rewrite stories when they're caught, twisting facts until people doubt the truth. I wasn't giving them that chance. I wanted every pixel to stand as witness. But while I gathered, I also thought about the morality of it. Revenge can eat you alive if you let it. I didn't want to become the kind of person who lived to humiliate. This wasn't about shaming her or Mark. It was about balance. They had painted me as naive, unaware, the fool in the story. My only goal was to restore truth, not through chaos but through undeniable evidence. To make it clear, I built a timeline. Not messy, not emotional. Just dates, times, locations, each supported by something verifiable. I listed her excuses beside his. Working late, helping a friend, stuck in traffic, and aligned them. The overlaps were impossible to ignore. Same hours, same parts of town, even identical captions posted within minutes of each other. Lies don't stay clean forever. They decay when you line them up next to facts. I compiled it all into a single document that read like a story. Their story, told without exaggeration, without my voice needing to scream. The facts screamed on their own. There was a part of me that wanted to confront her then and there, to throw the proof on the table and watch the truth detonate. But I didn't. I knew better than to rush. When emotions drive action, logic gets buried. I wanted the confrontation to happen when the evidence could speak louder than either of us. I rehearsed it in my head sometimes. Her confusion, her denial, the flicker of realization when she'd see what I had. I didn't crave her pain. I craved her honesty, even if it came too late to matter. And for Mark, I already knew what to expect. His guilt would look like justification. He'd call it a mistake, a moment of weakness, anything to make it sound smaller than it was. But I had no intention of debating morality with people who had already sold theirs cheap. As I worked through the nights, something in me began to change. The hurt didn't disappear, but it stopped feeling like chaos. It became structure, order. Betrayal had stripped away my illusions, but it had also given me focus. The act of gathering evidence felt like reclaiming control over a story they thought they owned. Each line of proof was a boundary drawn, a quiet statement that I would not be rewritten. Still, beneath the resolve, I could feel the weight of what I was about to do. Exposure is never clean. It burns everyone it touches. Friends would talk, families would pick sides, reputations would collapse. I told myself this wasn't vengeance, it was truth, but even truth can wound. One evening, around midnight, I closed my laptop and stared at the dark window. My reflection looked tired, but calm. The folders on my screen glowed like quiet weapons. Everything was in place. The evidence was complete, the timeline unbreakable, the story ready. All that remained was choosing when and how to reveal it. I could feel the inevitability of it pressing against me, the same way sunrise follows the longest night. There was no turning back now. They had chosen deceit. I had chosen truth. The exposure would be the consequence, not for revenge, but for closure. The night had taken enough from me. It was time for the truth to wake. The night before I decided to expose them, I barely slept. I kept replaying everything in my mind. Every message, every conversation, every look I had ignored. I wasn't driven by anger anymore. That had burned out long ago. What remained was clarity. The kind that comes when you finally stop asking why and start asking how. How do I show the truth without turning into the villain? How do I make sure the people who mattered finally saw what was hidden behind their perfect act? I wanted the facts to speak, not my emotions. So I began to plan, methodically, almost like building a case. Revenge, I realized, isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about illumination, shining a light so bright that no one can look away. I started with evidence. I had collected everything quietly over the past few months. Screenshots of messages, snippets of conversations, pictures that didn't fit the stories they told me. I arranged them into folders, labeled by date and event, cross-referencing each piece. It wasn't just about catching them. It was about building something irrefutable. I spent hours formatting everything into a single PDF. The cover page had one line. Sometimes silence hides betrayal. Here's the truth. Underneath, I wrote a short summary. Emotionless, stripped of bitterness. I wanted it to read like a report, not a confession. Then came the timeline, each entry neatly dated, supported by attached proof. Reading it from start to finish, even I felt the weight of it. It was undeniable. It wasn't a story anymore. It was a record of deception, piece by piece. Once the evidence was done, I moved to timing. That was crucial. I didn't want this to fade into the background or come off as a desperate outburst. Timing gives meaning to truth. I remembered that in 2 days there was a big engagement party, one of our mutual friends, the kind of event everyone in our circle would attend. Both of them were invited, of course. They would be smiling, pretending, surrounded by people who believed their lies. The thought made my stomach tighten. That was when I knew that night, while they were at the party, would be the perfect moment. Everyone would be online, checking posts, tagging each other, sharing stories. My post would drop into that feed like a silent explosion. No yelling, no scenes, just a calm truth cutting through the noise. Next came choosing where to post it. I wasn't going to dump it on some gossip-heavy platform where drama thrives. I wanted it somewhere personal but visible, where mutual friends would see it, where people respected the tone. I picked the platform we all used for serious updates. Birthdays, condolences, announcements. It carried weight. I began drafting my message. It started with a greeting, polite and restrained. "I never thought I'd have to write something like this," I began. "But after months of silence, I've decided to share the truth. Everything attached is verified. I'm not sharing this for sympathy, but for honesty. No curses, no anger, no emotional manipulation. Just truth stated with precision." At the end, I added the document link. Then I sat back and read it again, checking for tone. I didn't want pity. I wanted respect, but I wasn't naive. I knew there would be fallout. Questions, rumors, people trying to twist it. So I prepared for that too. I wrote a small FAQ and attached it as an image carousel. It answered the things people would inevitably ask. Why post this publicly? Because they lied publicly. Is this verified? Yes, everything is time-stamped and cross-checked. What do you want from this? Nothing. Only truth. It was my way of setting boundaries before the chaos began. I also messaged my parents privately. I didn't want them blindsided by gossip. I sent them a short note. "You might hear things. I'm okay. This isn't drama. It's clarity. I need to do this for my own peace." They didn't reply right away, and that silence hurt, but I knew they'd understand eventually. I deleted everything that felt cruel. The temptation to include the worst details was strong, but I forced myself to stop. There's a thin line between justice and humiliation. I wanted justice. If I had posted the private parts, the deeply personal things, I'd be no better than them. So I stripped it back to essentials. Enough to prove betrayal, not enough to destroy beyond repair. It was hard. Part of me wanted them to feel every ounce of pain I had felt. But the other part, the rational part that had survived their manipulation, knew that control was my real victory. They had lost theirs long ago. When the day came, my heart was steady. It surprised me. I thought I'd be shaking. But instead I felt calm, detached, almost serene. I opened my laptop, checked the document one last time, and pasted the post I'd written. My finger hovered over the publish button. For a moment I thought about backing out. What if this made me look petty? What if people judged me instead? But then I remembered all the nights I had cried while they lied effortlessly. I pressed share. The screen refreshed, and my post appeared at the top of my feed. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The silence was almost peaceful. Then came the first reaction, a single shocked emoji, then another. A comment appeared. "Is this real?" Then another. "I can't believe this." The notifications started to roll in faster, one after another. My phone buzzed constantly. Within an hour, it had spread through our entire circle. People were talking, calling, messaging. Some sent me private notes. "You did the right thing." Others stayed quiet, too stunned to react. And then, inevitably, my phone rang. It was Mark. I stared at his name on the screen until it stopped ringing. A minute later, it rang again. Then came a voice note, shaky, full of excuses. I didn't play it. She texted next. Long messages, full of panic and confusion. "Why would you do this? We can talk." But she never wanted to talk before. Now it was too late. I didn't respond. I didn't block them either. Silence is louder than any curse. That night, my apartment felt like a quiet battlefield after the smoke clears. My laptop still glowed with notifications, but I didn't open them. I just sat there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, feeling everything inside me settle. The revenge wasn't explosive or cinematic. It was cold, quiet, and complete. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't begged. I had simply let the truth speak. And in that stillness, I realized that was the loudest revenge of all. That night felt endless, not because of noise, but because of the strange quiet that followed chaos. After the public reveal, After the online storm, after all the messages and whispers and apologies, I sat in my apartment staring at the dim light filtering through the curtains. The world outside had moved on to new conversations, but my world had just cracked open. It wasn't a sharp pain anymore, it was a dull echo that wouldn't stop. Every sound, every notification, every silence seemed to ask the same question. Was it worth it? I didn't know the answer yet. When you expose someone publicly, there's no way to hide behind intention. You have to live with what follows. The looks, the reactions, the moments when people recognize you for your story before they recognize your name. I walked into a cafe 2 days later, and I could feel it. The glances, the lowered whispers. The woman behind the counter paused before saying my order, as if testing whether to ask or stay quiet. It was surreal. To be both pitied and respected at the same time. Everyone had an opinion about what I'd done. Some called it brave, others said I should have handled it privately. But none of them had lived those nights, staring at a phone screen, watching love rot in real time. The unraveling wasn't just theirs anymore. It was mine too. I had dismantled a part of myself in the process of seeking justice. I used to wake up next to her and feel safe. I used to text Mark about work or plans or random jokes. Now, both of their names sat like broken glass in my contacts, untouched but too sharp to delete. There's no manual for rebuilding your identity after betrayal. You just sit with it, one day at a time, waiting for the noise to quiet down. But there was something oddly empowering about the silence that came afterward. For months, I'd been haunted by questions I couldn't ask, feelings I couldn't express. Now everything was out, no more pretending, no more trying to decode half-truths or justify things that didn't make sense. The air felt lighter, even if it still stung. The apartment, stripped of her things, felt both empty and honest. The chipped coffee cup remained. The playlists still existed on my phone, but they no longer felt like wounds. They were relics of a version of me that believed in permanence. People reacted in waves. Some friends reached out to apologize for not noticing, for not warning me. Others kept their distance, afraid of becoming part of the narrative. That's something you don't realize until it happens. Truth makes people uncomfortable, even when they claim to value it. A few, though, showed up quietly. They didn't ask for the story. They didn't want the details. They just sat with me in silence, shared coffee, and talked about things that had nothing to do with betrayal. That kind of company felt like oxygen. Mark disappeared completely. He stopped posting online, stopped showing up anywhere familiar. Word spread that he'd moved to another city for a fresh start. I didn't wish him well, but I didn't wish him harm either. She, on the other hand, lingered. Her social media presence turned muted, reflective, half apologies framed as quotes about healing and forgiveness. I saw her trying to reclaim sympathy, trying to reframe the story as something mutual, as if pain could be evenly distributed. I didn't engage. She could write whatever narrative she needed to survive. Mine was already written in truth. Still, the aftermath had layers I hadn't expected. Exposing betrayal isn't just about them. It exposes parts of you too. I saw my own bitterness reflected in the comments, in the way people weaponized my story to make points about loyalty and love. I hadn't realized how hungry the world was for other people's pain until mine became public property. Yet I couldn't entirely resent it, because somewhere in that chaos, I began to understand something fundamental. Revenge isn't always destruction. Sometimes it's revelation, and revelation, though brutal, can be cleansing. There were nights I'd lie awake, replaying everything. The first moment I noticed something was off, the first lie she told, the first time Mark avoided eye contact, those small cracks that led to collapse. And even though I had won the moral battle, I still grieved. You don't just lose people when they betray you. You lose the version of yourself that trusted them. I missed that person, the one who laughed freely, who believed loyalty was unbreakable. That version of me was gone. In its place was someone quieter, sharper, less naive. Weeks passed, and slowly, the noise faded. The documents stopped being shared. New gossip took its place. People stopped asking questions. Life resumed its indifferent rhythm. But something inside me stayed altered. I started running again in the mornings, something I'd given up during the chaos. The rhythm of footsteps, the cool air, the isolation, it grounded me. I learned to appreciate solitude. I began writing again, not about revenge or betrayal, but about rebuilding, about what comes after the storm. One afternoon, months later, I ran into an old acquaintance. She hesitated before speaking, then said, "You handled everything with grace." I smiled, because she didn't see the nights of shaking hands, of nearly deleting everything, of fighting the urge to disappear. Grace isn't the absence of anger. It's the decision to keep your anger from defining you. That's what I had learned. The climax wasn't the reveal. It wasn't the party or the comments or the fallout. It was the quiet moment afterward, when I realized I didn't need to prove anything anymore. The truth had already done its work. I had faced betrayal and walked through it without becoming it. That was the victory. Not the exposure, not the humiliation, but the survival. As I stood by the window that night, watching the streetlights flicker, I whispered to myself, "It's over." Not as a declaration, but as acceptance. Because that's what real closure is. Not forgetting what happened, but losing the need to replay it. The lies were gone. The story was told, and finally, after everything, the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. In the months that followed, the noise that had once surrounded everything finally disappeared. At first, the silence felt foreign, almost hostile, like walking through a house after a fire, where everything familiar was still there, but nothing felt the same. I woke up each morning expecting the buzz of messages, the chaos of opinions, the storm of other people's voices telling me how I should feel. But there was nothing, just the hum of the refrigerator, the soft ticking of the clock, and my own thoughts echoing louder than they ever had before. Life after the unraveling didn't explode into clarity. It came in fragments, small realizations that slipped in through quiet mornings and lonely nights. I stopped hearing from people who once filled my weekends. The invitations slowed, then stopped altogether. At first, I wondered if they were still whispering about me, dissecting my choices in their private circles. But eventually I realized it didn't matter. People talk because they're uncomfortable with truth, and when truth becomes boring, they move on. I wasn't entertainment anymore. I was just the reminder that their social world wasn't as stable as they thought, so they distanced themselves, and that was fine. The ones who stayed, the few who didn't flinch from awkward silences or my exhaustion, became something stronger than friends. They became proof that not everyone disappears when things get complicated. Some days were easy, mechanical. I would wake up, make coffee, open my laptop, lose myself in work until the sun dipped behind the buildings. Other days were harder, like walking through fog. There were moments when grief came without warning, triggered by the smallest, most ordinary things. A scent, a song, the way sunlight hit a certain corner of the room. It's cruel how memory works. It doesn't ask permission to visit, but over time, I learned not to fight it. I let the memories come, let them hurt, then let them leave. That was progress, not healing in a cinematic way, but the slow, gritty kind that real life demands. Work became my refuge. It wasn't passion that kept me there. It was structure, deadlines, emails, tasks, all the small things that didn't ask how I was doing. I started taking projects more seriously, pushing harder, not to prove anything to anyone, but to remind myself that I still had control over something. In meetings, I noticed how much sharper I'd become. Betrayal teaches you to read people differently. You start to hear the hesitation behind words, the small inconsistencies in tone. I no longer tolerated half-truths. I demanded clarity from others and from myself. The price of being lied to is that you stop settling for comfortable illusions. Then one evening, her message arrived. After everything, she finally reached out. I remember staring at the screen for a long time before opening it. Her words were clumsy, unsure. A flood of apologies squeezed into a few trembling sentences. She said she didn't expect forgiveness, that she just needed to say sorry. I read it 3 times. I waited for rage, for vindication, for some kind of emotional explosion. But none came. I felt tired, empty but peaceful. Maybe because I had already grieved the version of her I once knew. The apology wasn't for me. It was her trying to clean up the mess she made in her own conscience. I didn't hate her anymore. Hate takes energy, and I had none left to spare. I saw her humanity, the fear, the weakness, the confusion, and that made it easier to let go. My reply was short. I saw everything. I'm focusing on my life now. I hope you do the same. That was it. I didn't need her pain or her guilt. I needed peace. Mark never wrote. His silence was its own message. Maybe guilt, maybe cowardice. It used to sting. The idea that someone who once called me his brother could vanish so completely. But eventually, I understood that silence was his way of hiding from what he'd done. I stopped waiting for an apology that would never come. I stopped writing imaginary confrontations in my head. I stopped trying to understand why. Sometimes closure isn't something you receive. It's something you decide. After a few months, I moved out of the apartment. I didn't rush the process. I wanted to do it when I felt ready, not just when the memories became unbearable. Packing was strange. Every item carried a ghost. I found old photos, handwritten notes, souvenirs from trips we'd taken together. I threw some away, kept others, not out of sentiment, but because I didn't want to erase everything. Even painful stories are still part of who you were. The day I handed over the keys, I stood in the empty living room and listened to the echo of my own breathing. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a victim in someone else's narrative. I felt like the author again. The new apartment was small but full of light. I painted one wall a bright yellow, impulsive, loud, and completely unlike me. It felt like rebellion against the dullness of grief. Every new object I placed in that space was a quiet declaration. I am rebuilding. I am still here. Slowly, normal life began to return, though it didn't look the same. I started seeing a few old friends again, the ones who had disappeared but came back with honesty instead of excuses. Some apologized for their silence, some didn't. I learned not to measure people by their apologies but by their consistency afterward. My circle became smaller, but stronger. Months passed, and I started dating again. At first it was awkward. Every conversation felt like walking on glass, and I questioned every small thing, every delay in a reply, every shift in tone. But I didn't want to stay afraid. I told myself that betrayal had taught me caution, not paranoia. I spoke openly about what I needed, about honesty, about respect. I didn't hide my scars. I treated them as proof of growth, and slowly, connections stopped feeling dangerous. There's a point after chaos where life becomes simple again. Not easy, but stripped of illusion. I stopped trying to rebuild the old version of myself and started building something new. I found peace in solitude, in quiet mornings with coffee, in sunsets that didn't carry memories. I began to understand that what I lost wasn't just people. It was a part of me that needed others to define my worth. What replaced it was quieter, steadier. The fallout didn't destroy me. It refined me. It taught me that truth always costs something, but the price is worth paying. The quiet I live in now isn't empty anymore. It's calm, deliberate, earned. I don't crave revenge or even closure. I have something better. Peace built on honesty, solitude without loneliness, and the knowledge that I survived the storm without becoming the storm myself. In the months that followed, the noise of what happened turned into a distant hum, something I could hear only when I stood still long enough to remember. The truth had already done its work. The damage was visible, but so was the clarity. What I didn't expect was how quiet the world becomes when there's nothing left to prove. That silence teaches you things. It shows you that truth, once revealed, has a life of its own. It doesn't belong to you anymore. It moves through people, changes their opinions, alters their comfort, and eventually finds its resting place somewhere beyond your control. At first, that lack of control felt strange, even terrifying. But later, it became a kind of peace. The first realization came slowly, through mundane routines. I'd wake up, make coffee, check messages, and notice how the flood of reactions had dried up. The world had moved on. The posts were buried under new scandals, new heartbreaks, new distractions. What had once felt monumental now existed as a closed chapter in everyone else's memory. That used to bother me. How could something that shattered my world become just another scroll in someone's feed? But that was the lesson. Truth may expose others, but it frees only you. Once it's out, its power shifts. It's no longer a weapon or a shield. It's a fact, and facts don't need attention to stay true. I started to understand that control was the biggest illusion of all. When betrayal first struck, I had wanted control. Control over the narrative, over their punishment, over how people saw me. I thought that if I just handled it perfectly, justice would appear, neat and balanced. But life doesn't reward precision with fairness. You can tell the truth, and people will still twist it to fit their comfort. Some called me brave, some called me vindictive. A few even suggested I had overreacted. At first that stung, but then I realized they weren't really judging me. They were defending their own fragile idea of security. People prefer stories where betrayal happens to someone else, someone distant. My story made them uncomfortable because it was real, and it could happen to anyone. That's when dignity became my anchor. In the beginning, I could have chosen rage. It was right there, coiled beneath the surface, ready to erupt. I could have shamed them more publicly, exposed more details, made the pain symmetrical. But rage burns fast and leaves ash. It feels powerful for a moment, but when it's gone, all you have left is the smoke you made yourself. Dignity, on the other hand, builds slowly. It doesn't give you the satisfaction of fire, it gives you the endurance of stone. I chose to act with restraint, not because I was saintly, but because I didn't want to live in the same chaos that broke me. Holding on to dignity was my rebellion against the impulse to destroy. It didn't make the hurt easier, but it gave the hurt meaning. With time, I began seeing people in a new light. The ones who disappeared after the truth came out revealed their priorities without ever saying a word. They weren't loyal to me, they were loyal to comfort. The people who stayed, who asked quiet questions and offered presence instead of gossip, became my real circle. It wasn't large, but it was solid. I learned that honesty is a natural filter. It removes the ones who thrive on illusion and keeps the ones who value authenticity. Before all this, I had mistaken politeness for loyalty. Now I could tell the difference. The ones who can face an uncomfortable truth without flinching are the ones worth keeping. Forgiveness came last, and it didn't arrive as a grand moral awakening. It came in small, reluctant moments. Sometimes I'd see their names somewhere, on a mutual friend's post, in an old email thread, and instead of anger, I felt distance. That distance was forgiveness in disguise. It wasn't approval, and it wasn't forgetfulness. It was release. I no longer needed their regret to validate my pain. I no longer needed apologies that would only reopen old wounds. Forgiveness wasn't about them at all. It was about taking my energy back from the endless loop of resentment. I stopped rehearsing what I'd say if we met again. I stopped imagining their remorse. They no longer lived rent-free in my head. And that, more than anything, felt like freedom. The more I reflected, the more I understood that truth has to be handled like fire, useful when controlled, destructive when thrown carelessly. Exposing them had been the right choice, but I had to accept that truth, once unleashed, doesn't discriminate. It burns everything, lies, illusions, and sometimes even your own peace. There were people who pitied them, people who questioned my motives, and for a while I wanted to defend myself. But eventually I stopped. The truth didn't need my defense. It existed independently of opinions. That realization was liberating. In quiet moments, I also questioned my own role, not as the victim, but as a human being capable of mistakes. I asked myself what I could learn beyond pain. The answer surprised me: empathy. Not for them, but for the complexity of being human. Everyone has a breaking point, a loneliness, a fear that drives bad decisions. Understanding that didn't excuse what they did, but it made me less cynical about people. Betrayal doesn't always come from evil. It often comes from weakness. Knowing that kept me from becoming bitter. Eventually, I came to see that exposure wasn't the true ending. It was just the midpoint. The real ending was quiet reclamation, learning to live again without needing to prove, perform, or justify. I began to see that control isn't about managing outcomes but mastering reactions. The world won't bend to your sense of fairness. People will disappoint you. Justice will come unevenly. But your response, measured, grounded, intentional, that's where real power lives. Now, when I think of that entire chapter, I no longer see it as a story about betrayal. It's a story about truth, raw, imperfect, necessary truth, and how it redefines the way you stand in the world. I learned that control is an illusion we chase when we're afraid to face chaos. The real courage lies in letting go, standing firm, and knowing that your truth, even if it costs you everything familiar, will always buy you yourself back. And that, in the end, is enough. Time has a strange way of healing and humbling you at the same time. Months turned into a quiet rhythm, the chaos of everything that happened fading into distant noise. Life, once so consumed by betrayal and revenge, started to stretch open again, slowly, cautiously. I wasn't the same person anymore. Something fundamental in me had shifted. There was less desperation, less need to prove anything to anyone. My focus turned inward, not in a selfish way, but in a rebuilding way. Every morning, I made it a habit to sit with a cup of coffee before the day began, just to breathe, to be still. I learned that healing isn't about forgetting the pain. It's about learning to live peacefully with what once tore you apart. At first, I didn't know where to begin. The ruins of everything familiar surrounded me, and I felt both free and lost. The people I used to call friends had either drifted away or didn't know how to talk to me anymore. The silence they left behind was heavy, but I filled it with something useful: purpose. I began volunteering at a local community center, working with kids who carried more hurt in their small bodies than most adults could handle. It started as a distraction, but it quickly became something bigger. They didn't care about my past. They only cared that I showed up, that I listened, that I didn't lie to them. Helping them helped me. It grounded me, reminded me that life is more than pain. It's connection. It's showing up even when you're tired of everything. Through that work, I began to rediscover something I had lost: empathy. Betrayal makes you guarded. It hardens your heart. But those kids softened me in the best way. They reminded me that honesty and kindness could exist without being weaknesses. It's strange, really, how healing yourself often starts with helping someone else. Every time one of them smiled or shared something difficult, I felt like a piece of my own trust was being restored. I didn't realize it then, but that community center was the first real step toward becoming whole again. Outside of that, I started to reconnect with my family more intentionally. For a while I had kept my distance, partly out of shame, partly because I didn't want to keep explaining what happened. But family doesn't always need explanations. They just want presence. I started visiting my parents, joining dinners I used to skip, having long, quiet conversations that didn't have to be about pain. My mum would ask how I was doing, and for the first time in a long time, I could say better and actually mean it. We talked about normal things: work, food, small joys, and that normalcy felt sacred. It reminded me that life didn't stop for my heartbreak. It kept going, waiting for me to catch up. Friends became another pillar. The few who stayed during the worst of it, those are the kind you don't take for granted. We took trips, not far ones, just enough to see new places and breathe new air. We laughed again, genuinely this time. There were moments when laughter caught me off guard, as if my body had forgotten how to do it. But it came back, little by little. One night, sitting around a bonfire, someone said, "You seem lighter now." I didn't know what to say, but they were right. I was lighter, not because everything was fixed, but because I had stopped carrying the weight that wasn't mine to hold anymore. Eventually, I began to open myself to love again, cautiously. I wasn't searching for someone to complete me. I was searching for someone who could understand me. I talked openly about boundaries from the start, about honesty, about communication, about respect. Those conversations weren't easy. They made some people uncomfortable, but that discomfort acted like a filter. It removed the ones who weren't ready for real connection and left space for someone genuine. Dating wasn't about forgetting what happened. It was about proving to myself that trust, while fragile, could still exist. And when I met someone who listened, really listened, it reminded me that vulnerability, when shared with the right person, isn't weakness. It's power. Professionally, I began to thrive again. I poured my focus into my work, took on projects that challenged me, even ones that scared me a little. Work became a space of purpose instead of escape. It gave me something tangible to build, something that wasn't tied to heartbreak or betrayal. Travel became part of that growth. Being in new cities, around strangers, gave me perspective. When you're far from the scene of your pain, you realize how small that world really was. You start to see that your story, no matter how heavy, is only one among billions. That humility is freeing. It shrinks your problems just enough for you to breathe again. One night, months later, I walked past my old apartment building. It looked different, smaller somehow. The windows were dark, and for the first time, I didn't feel that familiar punch in the chest. Instead, I felt distance. Not bitterness, just distance. Like it was something that had happened to a different version of me. I stood there for a while, letting that realization sink in. I wasn't trapped in that story anymore. I had survived it, grown from it, and now it was just a landmark in my life's map. Something to remember, not to relive. I turned and walked away. Not dramatically, just peacefully. A friend once asked me if I ever regretted exposing the truth. My answer came easily. No. I told them I regretted the pain it caused others, the fallout, the hurt, the public mess, but not the act itself. The truth had set me free. It didn't give me victory. It gave me clarity, and that clarity became my compass moving forward. I understood now that telling the truth isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your narrative. It's saying, this happened to me, but it doesn't define me. In my journal, I wrote something that became my quiet creed. I will rebuild, not to prove them wrong, but to prove myself right. That's exactly what I did. The rebuilding wasn't glamorous. It was steady, deliberate. I stopped chasing closure and started creating peace. I realized closure isn't something someone else gives you. It's something you build when you finally decide to stop reopening old wounds. Now, when I look at my life, I don't see what I lost. I see what I built from the wreckage. I see resilience, honesty, and strength I didn't know I had. The past is still there, but it no longer controls me. The person who once lived in pain learned how to live in purpose. And that, more than revenge or justice or exposure, is the truest form of victory. Truth matters more than comfort. That is the lesson that carved itself into me, slow and deep. People like to believe they can live in partial honesty, that a few well-placed lies can protect peace. But peace built on avoidance isn't peace at all. It's anesthesia. It numbs you while the infection spreads. I used to think that keeping quiet was the mature thing, that dignity meant swallowing hurt and pretending everything was fine. Now I know silence is just another form of surrender. You don't have to scream the truth, but you do have to live it. Because once you start bending for other people's deceit, you lose your spine one apology at a time. When I exposed what happened, I thought justice would feel like triumph. I imagined that truth, once revealed, would fix something in me. But truth doesn't repair you. It reveals you. It forces you to see what's left after illusion burns away. I wasn't left with victory. I was left with quiet, and quiet is a hard teacher. In that silence, I saw how much I had tolerated under the label of love, how much I had excused in the name of friendship. We often call people good because we need them to be. It's easier than facing the complexity of who they really are. But goodness that depends on secrecy isn't goodness at all. It's performance. There's a kind of strength that comes from restraint. I didn't humiliate them. I could have. I had the means and the evidence, and anger would have made it easy. But revenge burns fast and leaves nothing but ash. I wanted something different. I wanted the truth to stand on its own, undeniable and cold, like stone. Dignity isn't loud. It doesn't need witnesses or applause. It's the act of choosing calm when chaos tempts you to destroy. That choice didn't make me happy, but it made me solid. And in a world where everyone is desperate to prove themselves right, solidity is rare. I learned, too, that exposure doesn't end stories. It begins new ones. The moment you reveal a lie, everyone around you redefines themselves. People pick sides, friendships fracture, alliances shift. Some people step closer, others drift quietly away. You see who values truth and who values convenience. The ones who ghost you after honesty are the same ones who would have abandoned you in silence anyway. Their departure is a cleansing, not a loss. It's the universe trimming away the false edges of your life. Painful, yes, but purifying. Forgiveness used to sound weak to me. It felt like surrender, like letting people off the hook. But when the noise faded and I was left alone with my thoughts, I understood it differently. Forgiveness isn't about them, it's about weight. Carrying hate is heavy, and I was tired of dragging it around. Forgiving didn't mean trusting again, or pretending it never happened. It meant choosing not to build my identity around what they did. It meant allowing myself to feel peace without waiting for their remorse. In forgiving them, I wasn't excusing the betrayal. I was freeing myself from the gravity of it. The experience also changed how I see control. We spend so much of our lives trying to manage outcomes, what people think, what they say, how they react. But control is an illusion. You can only control your conduct, your response, your next step. The rest is chaos disguised as order. I learned to stop managing other people's stories and start owning mine. The truth doesn't always make you look good, but it always makes you real. I'd rather be painfully real than comfortably fake. The ripple effect of truth is unpredictable. Some people respected me more for standing up. Others whispered that I'd gone too far. I didn't argue with them. People who have never been betrayed will always underestimate its impact. They'll tell you to move on, to rise above, to be the bigger person. What they don't understand is that sometimes being the bigger person means standing your ground and refusing to be erased. Telling the truth isn't spite. It's self-respect in motion. With time, I began to see the difference between closure and peace. Closure is something you demand from others. Peace is something you build yourself. Closure asks for explanations, apologies, resolutions. Peace asks for none of that. It arrives when you stop needing things to make sense. It shows up quietly one morning, when you realize you've gone an entire day without thinking of them. That's how healing works. Not with grand gestures, but with the slow fading of what once consumed you. And then there's the moral spine of it all. The idea that truth isn't just about personal redemption. It's about integrity. If everyone chose truth over comfort, our connections would be fewer but stronger. We'd trust less easily but betray less deeply. The world would be messier in the open, but cleaner underneath. That's the trade I made. I gave up illusions for clarity. And though clarity can be brutal, it's also liberating. Sometimes I still replay moments in my head, not to relive them, but to remind myself how far I've come. I remember how it felt to discover the lies, the ache in my chest, the dizziness of disbelief. Then I remember the steadiness of telling the truth, the strength in my hands when I pressed post. That steadiness became my compass. Every time life tempts me to stay silent to avoid discomfort, I think of that night and remember what silence cost me. So this is what I've learned, distilled into something simple. People will lie. They will betray. They will disappoint. But none of that defines you unless you let it. What defines you is what you do with the truth once it's in your hands. Do you bury it to keep the peace? Or do you hold it up to the light, even if it burns? I chose the burn. It hurt, but it also cleansed. I came out scarred, yes, but scarred skin is tougher, more weathered, and less afraid of the next wound. In the end, the truth didn't just expose them, it rebuilt me. It stripped away what was false and left me with something raw, something real. I learned that honesty isn't about revenge. It's about return. It's about coming back to yourself after being lost in someone else's illusion. That's the moral I won't forget. Truth costs you, but it also frees you. And freedom, even when it's lonely, is always worth the price.